and let it go. All right, so I believe everything is just gearing up here. So Fumiko, you're in California now?
Today I am. I was in DC yesterday, and then tomorrow I'm headed to Connecticut.
Oh my gosh.
I know. Don't ask me how many miles I have on various airlines.
Oh man. But hey, you know what? It's gonna pay off, I guess, with all those miles, right?
Hopefully. I'm giving it away to students who want to. I'm raffling them away right now to low-income students in our campus.
Oh, that's actually a really cool idea. You can like donate miles.
Yes, no, whenever I want to give away things, students love it. Free trip to somewhere.
Oh man. All right, let's get started, and people will start to come in here. So we're gonna have a pretty fun evening here. So hello everybody. My name is Jake Sussman. I'm the founder of Superpower Mentors. We are a neurodiverse mentorship platform where we connect kids and teens with learning differences to their own mentor anywhere in the world. Now, what we've been doing every week is we've been bringing on either experts in the field or mentors to share just the latest and greatest either updates and stories all around neurodiversity. And what we want you to do, especially if you're tuning in here, please go ahead and comment, where are you watching from? There's nothing better than community. So there's a big question that we get a lot in our program, and that I personally have dealt with as someone with a learning difference. And the question is this: has your child or student ever blamed their ability not to do something on their learning difference? Growing up, I used to tell myself that I couldn't do math because of my ADHD. And guess what? I never actually fully learned it until COVID, right? And this isn't just me. This actually happens to millions of individuals with learning differences. Well, this is actually a thing. And now there is new research and people are starting to talk about it. So everyone, meet Dr. Fumiko Hoeft and Dr. Caroline Richter. Both specializing in learning differences and understanding the complexity of these challenges. Dr. Hoeft and Dr. Richter are at the forefront of ensuring a better world for the neurodiverse population. So quick intros on both Caroline and Fumiko. So I guess I'll start, and then I'm going to pass it over to you both. Okay, so Dr. Caroline Richter is an assistant professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. Her research expertise is in the area of children with learning differences. She is the founder and director of the Science of Child Development and Neurodiversity Laboratory, which is called the STARS Lab. She is interested in understanding the cognitive and socio-emotional aspects that contribute to the variability on the academic achievement of individuals with learning differences. And she is particularly interested in working with children with learning differences, autism spectrum disorders, and Williams syndrome. Caroline hopes that the results of her research can be used to inform targeted assessments and interventions, leading to improvements in the quality of life of individuals with neurodevelopmental challenges and their families. So
happy to be
awesome.
here.
And welcome, Caroline. And on the other side, we have Dr. Fumiko Hoeft, who is a renowned neuroscientist and the campus dean and CAO at the University of Connecticut's Waterbury campus, where she also serves as a professor of psychological sciences, psychiatry, computer science, education, and others. Woo! With an MD and PhD from Keio University in Tokyo, she has trained at Harvard, UCLA, Caltech, and Stanford. Dr. Hoeft's research delves into the neuroscience of learning, neurodiversity, emotional well-being, and resilience, supported by major federal grants from NIH, NSF, and USDA. She has received prestigious awards from neuroscience and education societies and has been widely published with over 300 articles and book chapters, some of whom we're going to be talking about today. A respected speaker, Dr. Hoeft has presented at numerous international venues, including TEDx and the White House. Her work is frequently featured in top media outlets such as the New York Times, NPR, CNN, The New Yorker, and Scientific American. How did I do? Did I get it?
Great.
Did we touch it? Okay, great. So welcome. I'm so excited to have you both on board here. I'd love just to kick us off. Can you please tell us, like, for both of you, what inspired you to get involved in helping students with learning differences? And Fumiko, can you please go first?
All right. So, just as a background, I went to medical school. So I was always interested in supporting children, supporting adults in the medical area. I became a psychiatrist after doing emergency medicine and other things, but then I got interested. So I was always interested in mental health aspects of people. And then I started doing research in brain sciences. And then I started doing more of these very basic phenomena of like how you process sound or how you process vision and how you integrate them. Then when I was a postdoc, there was a professor called John Gabrielli. He's now at MIT, but he was at Stanford back then. And then he said, I said, I want to be able to help people by using some of the knowledge that I have gained over my training. And then he said, I have a perfect topic for you. This is dyslexia, because it's a speech, sound, visual integration sort of problem. So that's how I got into dyslexia. And the more I did research, I felt like I really resonated, because English is not my first language. It's not Caroline's either, but she speaks great English. I suffered, or I struggled learning to read and write, especially in English. And it took me so much longer to read and write than my peers, especially as an adult when I came to the United States. So I felt like I really resonated with those struggles in different ways. And then I got into, and well, I'll get to that later, but I think just more recently, I think the past 10, 15 years, I have two neurodiverse learners. One has ADHD, the other one had dyslexia, or had. It's funny, I said had dyslexia, but we could talk about that more later also. And so I think that really fueled my interest and motivation to continue to do that. I'll stop here, and Caroline.
Awesome. Yes, again, happy to be here. Thank you for having me. So I'm from Brazil, and my background is in psychology. So my major was in psychology, and I worked there as a clinical psychologist for a little bit. But in my master's, I started working with kids with learning differences, in particular kids who have kind of an overlap between reading difficulties and math difficulties. And I was also really interested in working with kids with autism as well. But that overlap was always fascinating, and I'm always fascinated about, how different, let's say, disorders in quotes, or different constructs or of disabilities overlap. And then there is some overlap between autism and Williams syndrome. Previous literature has shown almost like Williams syndrome is the opposite of autism, which nowadays we know it's not, but their social profile is very different. Kids with Williams syndrome it's a rare genetic disorder. Many people here probably haven't heard about it, but they are usually socially seeking. So they really like interacting with others, and they are like hypersocial. And that was very contrasting with kids with autism. So I came to the United States to do my PhD at the University of Louisville in Kentucky, working mostly with kids with Williams syndrome. But I had all that background from Brazil, working with kids with learning differences, autism, and then Williams syndrome. And then I met Fumiko, where I did my postdoc with her at the University of Connecticut, and started doing more dyslexia work, and also integrated kind of my background on cognitive behavior therapy and as a clinical psychologist, and my interest in mental health, emotional well-being. So we started doing a lot of emotional well-being and mental health related work together. I don't know if that was clear, but
that is. And I'm curious. So, I mean, you met at UConn, right? So
yeah, we met when I started my postdoc.
Do you remember like the moment you realized that you want to actually team up? Like you guys want to like work together on some stuff? Well, take me back to that.
Oh my gosh,
I remember really
for a moment.
I remember really well. Do you want to start, Fumiko?
No, you go ahead. Well, yes, let me start first. Well, she's one of the most personable, hardworking, creative person, and that really comes across the minute you meet her. So everyone in our lab really liked her. We do like a group interview as well as individual interviews, and then she was just so amazing in her resume and productive. And so it was very easy for me to, I think I immediately offered you a position. And she is the only postdoc to date that I've encountered that started before she got her PhD. So typically everyone's stressed out with their dissertation, and they'll say, I can't talk to you, I can't do anything until I finish my PhD. But then she was like, no problem, I can start right away. And then she was working, and I felt like, is she full-time? What happened to her dissertation? And she was working in the background, and she got all that done. And then she was working like full-time with us remotely. And then she joined, and then she got a faculty position in a year, and then she left, but she didn't leave us because we're still collaborating. So that's kind of my encounter with Caroline.
That's awesome. Yes. And we will be collaborating for, at least hopefully for me, for life.
Oh, that's so great. I love that. And I think, there's nothing better when you end up finding that, that team member, right? That other person that fulfills like the other side to the work, so that we can now start to all drive things forward. And I think that there's something really important about also recognizing what you're good at and your strengths and the different pieces. And that I want to start to tie us into your some of your research study that was posted back in May of 2023 which really captured my attention. It's titled a meta-analytic review of the consequences of stigma and stereotype threat for individuals with specific learning disabilities. My question for you is, why is this important? And like, what's a stereotype? Like, what is this? And how come no one's ever really heard of this before? Because I think this is one of the most important parts to helping to lift someone up with a learning difference. So tell me about this topic.
Yeah, I'm going to do the quick and easy kind of segue into this, and then Caroline can do the more deeper research part. How's that?
Great.
She's smarter than me. All right. So I think this is a very important topic, as she will explain what stereotype and stereotype threat is, because every child should be offered a chance to express their full potential. And a stereotype threat could severely interfere with it. So you might be really smart. I know you are, Jake, but for example, in certain situations, you might get too nervous and other things, and you might not be able to show your strength and talents.
Well, I told myself that I would always struggle with math because of my ADHD. Like that was always I actually believe that. Like that's a thing. And doesn't mean I can't learn it.
Right. And so that kind of really shapes your life and how you view things, how you interact with people, and how you perform in high stake tests and so on. And this, I think, is really something that we can avoid, and we should understand this better. A lot of the research in this area, and I'll hand it over to Caroline in just a minute, but has been done mostly in the area of low-income students, African Americans, and there's a wide range of studies. For example, white men can't perform in basketball, and African American males will do much better. And so those are all kind of stereotypes that some people, or a lot of people, have. But it hasn't really been studied and researched and identified in individuals with learning differences. But we felt very strongly that even though when you're sitting in the classroom, you can't tell who has dyslexia or ADHD and so on, but there must be something underlying it, just based on our conversations with families and children and schools. Unless they can advocate, they can't go back. Unless they can kind of fight back with these stereotypes, and those that you can't. The LD schools that are around won't want their students to go back to the sort of mainstream classrooms. And a lot of these things were inspired through these conversations and observations. And I'm going to hand it over to Caroline to talk about more of the core science piece.
Great. Yeah. So as Fumiko said, so that stigma is that negative belief you might have about an individual or a group of people based on a certain characteristic. So having a diagnosis of ADHD, like you mentioned, or learning differences might have that stigmatization attached to it. So many people might think like, oh, if you have ADHD or if you have a learning difference, you're lazy or you have a disorder, right? You have that disability. So that means something is lacking, right? Like language has power, right? So it's almost like it makes you, like a group of people believe that those individuals will perform less in certain tasks, right? So that might have an impact on individuals or children's performance. And then stereotype threat is very similar, but it's more situational. So, for example, I know I have uh, English exam tomorrow, and I know I have dyslexia. So I have a fear of confirming that negative belief, right? That I'm really bad at reading. Even though I've been compensating, Fumiko has been doing some amazing research on compensatory mechanisms, and I know I can do that exam really well. But that fear deploys or diminishes, reduces your ability to do well in that task. So what we found in that study was that it was a literature review and a meta-analysis. So we're looking for previous studies, what previous researchers have done. So we found only 16 studies, which is very few, looking at individuals with learning differences in those two topics, stigma or stereotype threat. And the have effect that we were able to find was that there was a significant correlation. So individuals who have higher stigma have lower self-esteem. But there was a lot of indication that these might also affect some other mental health outcomes. But we were not able to say for certain because more research is needed. So we know it might impact anxiety, depression, their quality of life, and even their academic performance, but more research is needed in that area as well.
Wow. And I think that there's something really significant to say about that because, I'll give you an example. So when I was in 6th grade, I was 4 grade levels behind in reading, forced to read out loud in class. Now, I'm a big advocate for the science of reading. Okay. I'm a big advocate for Orton Gillingham. I believe that it's an incredible approach of teaching dyslexics how to read, or not just dyslexics, but anyone. Okay. But it didn't work on me at first, right? Because my entire relationship with reading was pain, right? And I believe that I couldn't do it as a kid. I couldn't until I started to have someone that said, you know what? I understand you. I also struggled and you're going to get through this, right? That actually shifted my mindset around my relationship with reading. And I remember reading in your study, one of the recommendations or suggestions that you had to help kind of stay above that stereotype, right, is to have a role model within the same group that has overcome it. Can you speak on that a little bit?
Yes. And actually, we just wrote a paper that's still under review, but when it's out, we'll be happy to share with you, Jake, looking at different stress and resilience factors for kids with learning differences. And one factor that was highlighted was peer mentorship, right? So having that peer or that role model can be very important for you to overcome these challenges that you might face.
Right. And it's interesting that too, because in our program, we found that 93% of our mentees have seen an improvement in their emotional well-being, right? And these are kids that are coming from, and this is more, qualitative from parents, but like they say that their mentor has impacted their kid faster than a lot of different professionals that they've worked with, simply not saying they're better or a replacement for therapy, but more so this mentor can speak a language that very few people can, right? Because they've been there. And I think there's something significant about that also. So.
Yes.
Yeah, we have a paper that's forthcoming where we looked at mentorings and what kind of aspects are very important, especially in neurodiverse learners. It's actually very hard to find things that are solely focused on neurodiverse learners. And so we have a paper coming up on that includes recommendations on, so you might like it, on mentoring practices and what seems to work. And so that's forthcoming as well.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, why should we focus more, like, why should we focus more on stereotype threats? Like, do parents, because a lot of our audience are parents, right? So when it comes to parenting, and based on your experience with this topic, what are some thoughts around how that could impact parenting, not just maybe teaching?
Yes. So this other paper where Fumiko and I wrote together, we found that there are things that can be done to support individuals with learning differences at multiple levels. One of the levels is family level, right? So having a supportive home environment, so having a family that understands their differences, but it's very supportive and helps with not only their own coping skills, but support students coping skills, and that also supports the individual level, so like supporting kids self-esteem, so taking that strength-based approach that we were talking at the beginning. So what are things that you're actually really good at that can support you, or what are strategies maybe for this particular thing you're not good at that you can use, that you can actually be successful. So having grit, making sure you can continue to pursue those goals you're interested in, that self-efficacy can be really important. So those are more individual and family levels.
Yeah, and this is something else that we've seen also, but in our conversations with parents and educators, do you feel that this type of research should is something that should be aligned as we're teaching a student how to read? Like, does stereotype threats play a role in that, or do we not know enough yet to even say that?
So definitely, I think we have strong enough evidence when we collect all the papers together, like each research study is small and the evidence might be scattered, but when we pull this together in this meta-analysis, I think the evidence is quite strong that there is stereotype threat. I think the one thing that we really need to be aware of is stereotype threat. We can't just say, Jake, we're going to give you a pill, or we're going to do interventions or something that would reduce your stereotype threat. It doesn't work that way. It's the society's interaction. It's the interaction with the society. So we really have to educate not just students that are neurodiverse, but the whole teachers, the classroom, those who are not neurodiverse. And that is, I think, especially for this area, it's as important, or almost more important in a way, to learn together with the whole classroom and the society. And that way we can reduce stereotype threat. We can have every student reach their full potential.
Wow, that's so I kind of want to go a little bit bigger now, because we're talking about, it's actually not just something that's going to happen in the home. And I do believe that there's ways, especially with siblings that may not have learning differences, right? And parents that may not understand, like, their or culture, right? There's many different areas in the home that we can look at. But Fumiko, what you're saying, it's actually much bigger than that. So you're talking about, is it more like educating a collective, like either at a school, on different ways to understand these differences? Or what do you mean by interaction with societies? So
I think I think family is very important also. So educating the child. So one of the things, well, let me go back to the classroom thing since we started talking about that. So for example, the immediate thing you could do as a teacher, if you were a teacher, what is to remove these kind of triggers. So for example, and not with neurodiverse learners, but if you go into a classroom and it's a science classroom and you see all these white men figures like Einstein or others that became won Nobel Prize, for example, those could trigger stereotype threat to women or females who want to pursue STEM. So that's kind of one obvious example. I think the other students' understanding of neurodiverse learners, they have challenges in particular areas like reading or math, but in the case of dyscalculia, but in dyslexia, say it's reading or attention focus if it's ADHD, but they have the understanding that they have strengths and things that you can't do. So I love, for example, always bounce off ideas with my neurodiverse kind of faculty member, because whenever I have major big picture thinking issues, I call this friend and say, can you give me 30 minutes of your time? I'm trying to come up with this research grant or idea, and I really can't put everything together. And then even though he doesn't have any background, he'll say like, oh, you should do this. And it's very eye-opening, and I get fantastic ideas from him. I think, Carol, you know who I'm talking about. But so I think I think understanding that I wouldn't ask him to proofread my writing, but I would talk to him about these ideas, and I always get inspired and energized when I talk to him. So I think understanding those things and seeing that in the classroom, for example, is important. And of course, it's important to talk about it within the family when you have neurodiverse learners and their siblings to understand each other. So.
I think that, what you're saying is it's so important and also very interesting that it really just comes down to the communication, right? And what we can change what comes out of our mouth very easily, right? And that doesn't cost anything, right? It's a matter of looking at, perhaps for neurodiverse learners, the approach is not going to be the same approach that maybe you as the teacher, you as general, as the teacher or the parent grew up with or understand. We have to almost throw it all away and actually hold space for that person, right? And on the holding space piece, Caroline, you are really into the, before we went live, there was this conversation around ADHD and meditation, right?
Yeah.
Tell me about this, because when we think of meditation, we think of, it's like very holistic. And a lot of times, like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like when you look at the medical field and being holistic medicine are things that don't really get along very well, right? So like, tell me about this that you're looking into with ADHD and meditation. That's so cool.
Yeah. So that was a proposal we put together, but the goal is to see if it's an app. So it's a kid-friendly meditation. So kids don't need to focus on their breathing, but they are called to focus on visual stimuli. And then that visual stimuli becomes pretty much the screen becomes black, and they are invited to just use their auditory stimuli, so noise. And it's easier if you do that closing your eyes. So it's a meditation focusing on audio. And we want to see when you go through that game, are you able to improve not only your attention, but maybe even your reading skills, because you become, more attentive for their period, and maybe that will generalize to other areas. And actually, there is some research showing that mindfulness-based interventions might be helpful to alleviate stereotype threat. And, mindfulness is pretty much paying attention to the present moment. So we were talking about awareness in the school setting, but kids being aware of their thoughts and talking about it is really important too, right? And understanding that not only they have their own strengths, but everyone has strengths and weaknesses, right? It's not only themselves that they are bad in one thing and then good in another thing. Like, I'm terrible in so many things and I'm good in so many things, right? Understanding that. But getting back to mindfulness, sorry, I did a loop in my thought. We have a social emotional curriculum that we investigated in a learning differences school here in Birmingham area. And we don't have findings yet, but we do have some feedback from students and what they learned about it. And the curriculum will teach students to, pay attention. That one will actually pay attention to their own breath, take brain breaks. So that can be just, doing a 1-minute brief meditation, or maybe even walking outside and paying attention while you're walking in one thing instead of just be on your phone or talking to others. And the students are saying like that it's really interesting, and they like how those techniques help them become more aware of their own thoughts and feelings and emotions, and how sometimes they were tired and they didn't realize, or they were about to fight with someone. And through those techniques, they were able to, not fight and maybe take a step back and change their approach. So, yeah. So hopefully we'll have some more findings.
I'm so excited to hear more about that. Something that we've seen in our program and something that we're actively doing is we're helping our mentees better understand their outlets and then draw connections and parallels to why they're gravitating toward those outlets. Because by creating an understanding that these interests that they have aren't random, it directly ties into how their brain works, right? Like I, having ADHD, am going to gravitate toward activities that I'm in control of because or that helps me feel like I'm in motion. Like for our kids who play video games, maybe it's not just the video game, maybe it's actually the fact that it gives me this illusion of progress, right? Like I'm actually going somewhere. So like if I'm feeling down about myself, I'm going to hop on video games and feel like I'm going somewhere. And for kids, if they don't understand that they have a superpower called hyperfocus, if you don't know how to use that, it could be destructive or it could be super productive. You just have to know how to hone it in. And I think it's really powerful by combining that role model to some of these tactics, what you're saying, the more kids can not just kids, but people, right, can understand none of this is random, right? None of their interests, none of the things that work are random. They actually directly connect to what works to how their brain functions. I think it's the most fascinating thing. I think parents watching and educators, I think it's in what you both are bringing out here is that we have to think much more beyond just IQ, right? It's not just what we see in a test. There's actually a whole other side to this, right? Which is the feeling, which is awareness, which is the thing you can't physically hold and see. It's a feeling, right? It's confidence. So, when I say that, like, what comes up for you? Is that something that is like, that's part of the motivation? Like what comes up when you hear that?
I think I'll go first. And I think you're spot on in terms of kind of what are the things that we need to address to support students to reduce stereotype threat, to increase their social emotional resilience and so on. And that plays an integral role, as we talked about, through stereotype threat and other mechanisms that it could potentially impact the performance, even though they went through Orton Gillingham or whatever intervention might be, and they're reading perfectly great. And so just in terms of some of the elements that people talk about in terms of what should you do to build resilience against stereotype threat? So I'll just give you sort of a couple of key points to see if there's some things that would stick with you. So one is growth mindset really helps. So feeling that you are able to change and you have power over it, you have control over the situation, helps, which also means that being in a safe environment where you're allowed to fail, where you feel that you can fail and people will accept you for who they are, those things are very important. So safe environment, growth mindset, these are very important. One of the things in terms of intervention that has been heavily studied is self-affirmation techniques, not in neurodiverse learners, but self-affirmation just generally for stereotype threat. So it's something like, for example, before high-stake tests, you think you might kind of underperform, you write something about what you care about. It might be about your teddy bear, or it might be about your friend, or it might be about your family and your trips that you did together. And writing that, or maybe in this case, it should be audio recording if you don't like writing, But those kind of, or taking pictures, and I'll talk about pictures in just a little bit, but these self-affirmation techniques are thought to really help have a long-lasting effects on these high-stake tests, especially if you're likely to be impacted by stereotype threat. And I talked about photo. That's what I did when my kids were little. You have, you ask kids or people to go and take a picture every day of what you really care about and what you really appreciate. So we started doing this. I got these retro Polaroid cameras and these cassettes or whatever those things are very expensive. It's like $3 per little photograph, but I got those and said, go off and take a picture a day of things that you care about. And then in my case, they would want to take a picture first thing in the morning. So most of the pictures were me in pajamas or their train set. And then I said, okay, I don't need 20 pictures or 50 pictures of train sets of me in pajamas. So we stopped after a while. We had to change tactics there, but those are supposed to sort of help with self-affirmation and have a positive impact. Being able to reframe the task, for example, saying, okay, maybe I did a task I didn't perform that well last time, but because it was a hard task for everyone, it wasn't just me, or and being able to confine it as a situational issues, those are supposed to have a positive impact. And I think these things all resonate with neurodiverse learners and how they perform also. And then I said also earlier, de-emphasizing the threatened social identities, like taking down Einstein's posters everywhere from in a science lab, for example. And then finally, as we talked about many times already, role models, peer role models who are close in age, who's gone through the same experience, who has this shared experience that leads to a safe environment where they can go and let everything out and kind of have a shared experience. Those are very important. And that, I believe, will lead to them feeling like they can change the world, they can change and perform as well as their peers or excel more than their peers. They will believe in themselves. They feel like they have control over the situation and will have a positive impact. I think the one final thing, and it's related to this, and so it's implicit in what I said, but is really to feel that you have control over the situation. So there's a lot of research in this area in animals and others. So it would be very different if, Jake, you said you're doing this because you like doing it and you chose to do this and that's why you're there. If people were telling you and you don't like it and we said, Jake, you have to sit there and do a podcast every day, that is going to have a negative impact on you. So creating situations where they feel like they chose that carrot, even though they hate carrots, but they chose it and they decided to eat it, is going to make them like carrots more than saying you have to eat carrots. I know you hate it, but you have to eat it every day. So anyway, I'll stop.
Can I ask you a question on that? Because I just had a conversation with a parent recently who was telling me about their child is in high school and wants to be an animator, right? But there's no money in that, right? According to the parent, and would prefer them to be an architect or an engineer, right? So when it comes to parenting and like wanting to help position your kids for success, now this young man is frozen also. It doesn't really have any motivation yet. So there's a lot, we're trying to help find that passion, right? So when it comes to parents wanting to guide their kids, going off what you're saying about helping the kids feel like that's their own decision, not just their parents saying no, yes, no money, yes money, right? What are some thoughts for parents when it comes to that?
I'd love to know also a middle schooler and high schooler. And if I had that, I would have no problem raising kids. So that is a very challenging question. I don't think there's right answer to it, but just as a food of thought, I'll give you one more research example. So they did a test where they measured their brain and gave people to do a very simple test or task, which is to estimate 60 seconds and press the stopwatch. And so they had to do that in one condition. You could choose whether it's a soccer ball stopwatch. I'm sort of making some of this up, but it's a soccer ball stopwatch or a I don't know, a heart-shaped stopwatch, and they could choose. And just that simple thing, even though that wasn't related to the whole estimation, it wasn't about estimation, right? Because it was just about cosmetics of choosing the stopwatch, which is the tool they used in that test. Just letting them choose that gave them, they practiced more, they eventually became more accurate at it, and more importantly, their brain was more on fire in this reward area. So if you let them choose, and I'm sorry I'm not giving you the
No, there's
this one. I will let you know if I find out, and I'll experiment on my kids. But I think those are things that are, so I thought it was pretty remarkable when I saw that study. Your reward center is lighting up like crazy, and it's not attenuating or damping down. If you tell them what they need to do, and if you do that, then that area, or if you give things like, people talk about extrinsic motivation versus intrinsic motivation. If you give them money to do something, then that area of the reward center is going to dampen down in terms of activation, versus if you let them choose, it's going to stay active, and if they're intrinsically motivated. So not giving you the answer, but it is important, is what I would
I love a good political answer. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and another thing, it's very in alignment with this experiment Fumiko was mentioning, is the parenting styles. So that usually the parenting style that supports the best outcomes for kids is exactly that one that allows some choice, right? So we call it like authoritative parenting. So parents being warm and flexible, but also making expectations clear and rules and consequences for breaking them clear. So not necessarily not having rules, because that's not really good, but nurturing and allowing them some autonomy for choosing their own path, right? Which can be really hard. It's easier said than done, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I'm really excited to just continue this conversation as we start to learn more, and just collaborating on different works and seeing how we can better impact these kids. I mean, that's what it's all about, the next generation. So just final just questions is, what are your ultimate visions with your work? And yeah, what are your ultimate visions with your work? Both of you.
All right, who wants to go first? I'll start. Let's see. I have a lot of things that I want to do, and in different areas, but related to this conversation, I really do want to be able to take a whole child approach or whole individual approach, where we address not only their challenges, but also their weakness. Where we not only focus on academics, but also on social emotional growth and motivation and resilience. And that is the area that I'd love to go into in terms of research. The other end will be, I've been doing a lot of work on neurobiological mechanisms and proposing new theories, and I would really like to kind of bridge some of these, bring these biological theories and sort of take a precision education type approach, where now, for example, cancer, it's amazing. I had breast cancer last year, and if you take a bit of your tumor biopsy, and then you can expose them to chemotherapy, and then they'll give you a score, one number that tells you how likely you are to respond to chemotherapy. Cancer is the area where it's made the most progress in terms of precision medicine, but I'm not saying it's going to be easy like that, but I'd love to see it go more into precision medicine, precision education, where we look at the whole child, look at all the environments and factors, and say these are the best options, and that we can provide students or children very early on, so that we don't have to wait until the children fails, wait until they feel like they're not the smartest kid in the class, and so on. So that's kind of where I'd like to go. A little vague.
Whoa.
But
No, that's cool. Let's be vague. I like that.
Yeah.
Caroline.
Yeah. So let's say that It's very similar to what Fumiko said, but without the biological perspective. So I have a lot of exciting projects looking at supporting students' social emotional learning in general. So making sure that students feel supported. And of course, we know that adequate intervention for reading and math, it's super important also for their self-esteem. So making sure they are supported there, but also supported in their emotional well-being. And something that I'm really excited about is making sure there is awareness in general. So it's something we also talked about neurodiversity and that strengths-based approach, understanding that, you know, there are brain variations, but not necessarily deficits. But they are variations that might actually have a lot of positive impact in the society, right? So like changing almost like an arc of failure versus growth. So we want to emphasize or foster that growth, right? So like fostering students feeling of being accepted and valued, and that can be via peer mentorship, via teaching them different coping skills. So for example, mindfulness strategies, or, you know, a social emotional curriculum that not only teaches mindfulness, but other strategies. We even teach kids about their own brain so they can be more aware of themselves and understand how their brain works. And, you know, teaching them how to be grateful. For example, practicing gratitude is really important. So they might use those strategies, like Fumiko said, taking pictures of things that I care about. So they might think, they might write like, I'm really grateful for my friend because we were hanging out today and it was a lot of fun. So I just met with a family and we were talking about their kid is 4 and they were, you know, they think he might have dyslexia, and they were asking me, I was like, first, he must love school, because at that age, if he doesn't do that, all the other things are not going to go into place, right? So like if he starts, you know, fighting with his peers and all of that, nothing else is going to fall into place. So let's play with sounds, let's play with letters, let's work on rhyming skills and, you know, maybe playing songs and all of that, but it must be through something that he likes, right? So using the child's interest, like Fumiko was saying, what they are motivated and what they choose, right? So instead of let's sit here and learn letters, like what are things they like? And everything has letters. And, you know, if they love dinosaurs, let's learn letters through the dinosaurs.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Right. So also vague, but hopefully.
Well, actually, what's so cool, and I am so pumped up right now. Like I'm like at the edge of my seat, because there's nothing that excites me more than when we're talking about the future of these kids, right? I was that kid, right? And like I know Fumiko, you have kids that are in that space, and like we are all trying to push that dial forward, and you all are so inspiring, and really I admire the work that all of you both are doing. You know, Caroline, to touch on quickly what you were saying about, you know, finding that commonality there, right? We had a mentee, it was during COVID, where he had severe dyslexia, like literally wouldn't pick up a book at all. And I think he may have been like 10 or 11, but we found that he had this obsession with Alicia Keys. Loves Alicia Keys, like could sing any song. And what we did was we printed out Alicia Keys lyrics, and he was teaching himself how to read through reading Alicia Keys lyrics, because he can sing along and read the lyrics at the same time. It was so cool. And that's what got him excited to start picking up other books. I mean, it was awesome, because now when he saw a book, he thought of Alicia Keys. Boom.
Awesome.
It's so cool. Great. You know what I mean? Anyway.
But I think there's also, that's the motivation piece. And I think that's great and fantastic. And that's absolutely crucial. But there's also more of the biological piece as well. And I'll give you some just one tangential experience about myself. So as a child, I was weak and I would faint everywhere, and I would just to faint because of my vagus nerve and so on. And my blood pressure would go down. My mother never understood why whenever I have to run errands with my mom, I would faint, or at school gatherings in the heat, I would faint, but I can stand for 2 hours at an amusement park and I would not faint. And I kept on telling my mother that I'm not faking or fibbing when I don't, when I'm running errands or at school with my school, but there's some kind of facts about your blood pressure goes up, and then you can, and you're healthier in those, in those kind of situations when you're motivated. So I just wanted to say that motivation is key, and these are not fibbing, or these are very important, that has a biological basis to it. But
this is so fun. All right, well, we're gonna definitely have to do this again, and probably next quarter we'll regroup, be like, where are we at, everyone, how we doing? But listen, for our parents and for our audience watching this, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to post them in the comments. You can reach out to me directly. I'll make sure I forward it to both Fumiko and Caroline if you have anything specific. So again, we are all here for you. We're doing the work so that we can make sure that your kids and future generations don't have to suffer the way that, we are now. So listen, again, any questions, don't hesitate to ask. Make sure you tune back in next week. I have a really fun guest coming on. So Fumiko and Caroline, thank you so much for your time and sharing some of your wisdom.
thanks very much for having us.
Awesome. All right, everyone, take care now.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Bye.